Bill Spencer's life had always been a battlefield of power plays and ruthless ambition, yet nothing had prepared him for the dark web of deceit Grace Buckingham had spun around Liam's medical records. It began with a murmur in the corridors of Forrester Creations' back office, a lone intern stumbling upon a stack of physically implausible prescriptions, each bearing the same neat, tight cursive signature that matched Grace's familiar script. The discovery stumbled into Bill's territory when he, restless and driven by an indefinable sense of foreboding, stormed into his private study at Spencer Publications, scattered the digital files on his sleek conference table, and vowed to uncover every falsified filament of the scheme. His first move was methodical. He summoned an expert in forensic handwriting to examine the prescriptions, and when the analyst confirmed Bill's worst fears, that multiple signatures had been expertly forged, he realized the conspiracy was far more sinister than he'd imagined. This was not a simple cover-up, but a sprawling charade crafted to usurp medical protocols, manipulate perception, and consolidate power over Owen Hunt's precarious neurosurgical reputation. And at the center of it all stood Grace, charming and inscrutable, her motives buried deep beneath layers of pharmaceutical subterfuge. Bill's private investigation barreled forward like a freight train. He covertly accessed the hospital's prescription logs, tracing the timeline back to the day Liam Spencer had supposedly undergone a groundbreaking, unapproved brain surgery. There, in that labyrinth of digital timestamps and doctor's entries, the phantom procedure was recorded as a triumph, yet no surgical team bore the physical toll of having performed it. Bill cross-referenced the nursing staff's schedules against the operating room logs and discovered a void. A window of 2 hours where no staff badge had been scanned in or out, but where the record claimed 6 nurses, 2 anesthesiologists, and a chief neurosurgeon had orchestrated the clandestine operation. As he dug deeper, he unearthed a chilling pattern. Grace had tampered not only with Liam's medical chart, but had meticulously overwritten postoperative observations, substituting genuine neurological assessments with fabricated entries that portrayed a seamless recovery. It was a brazen orchestration. Grace had effectively manufactured a medical miracle, using that illusion to gain Brooke Logan's unwavering advocacy when the case file crossed the conference table at Spencer Publications. Brooke, ever the champion of compassion and progress, had championed the cause, backing the funding for the so-called breakthrough brain surgery with her characteristic zeal. Bill had no doubt that Grace had counted on Brooke's influence to lend legitimacy to her ruse. The more Bill uncovered, the more he realized that Grace's forgeries were only the tip of the iceberg. Behind the soothing sheen of Florentian medical legal documents lay a darker venture, a hidden cache of controlled substances, sedatives, dissociatives, and strong narcotics, secretly funneled into Liam's regimen. With surgical precision, Grace layered these drugs into his recovery protocol, exploiting the power imbalance inherent in patient-physician trust. Bill discovered that during this so-called rehab phase, Grace had arranged unmonitored after-hours clinic sessions in a secluded wing of the hospital, billing them as routine follow-ups. There, in rooms stripped of surveillance cameras and populated by acolytes handpicked for their silence, she administered shock-inducing doses designed to manipulate Liam's state of mind, steering him toward vulnerability and dependence. It was a cold, calculated form of psychological warfare. As he pored over shipping manifests, Bill found discrepancies, orders for medication beyond the scope of treating acute postoperative pain, inked under a phony institutional account, and charged to a hospital fund overseen by Brooke herself. Now Brooke's good intentions were weaponized against her, and her name was dangerously close to being dragged into a criminal investigation. Fueled by indignation and the desire to protect his family's legacy, Bill confronted Liam, arranging a clandestine meeting in his dimly lit office late one evening. He laid out the evidence, the forged signatures, the ghost surgeries, the altered charts, and the hidden dose logs. Liam's face went from disbelief to rage to heartbreak in the span of a single breath. He felt the sting of betrayal, not only from the doctor who had sworn to heal him, but also from the woman who had so publicly celebrated his miraculous recovery. Together, father and son orchestrated a plan. They would trap Grace in her own web. They enlisted the help of a tech-savvy forensic accountant, tapped hospital security logs, and coordinated with district attorneys to set a sting. Bill's plan was to bait Grace with a mock petition, an institutional grant application for funding further neurological research, promising an even more lucrative budget than the first. Grace, blinded by ambition and convinced of her invincibility, would take the bait and submit the paperwork, inadvertently reusing her forgery techniques. The day of reckoning arrived with ruthless swiftness. Bill, Brooke, Liam, and a hand-picked squad of medical investigators sat in a mirrored conference room at the hospital, watching the monitor feed from the hidden cameras in Grace's shadowy after-hours quarters. As Grace signed off on the petition, her pen gliding across the header with practiced ease, the investigators captured every stroke, every hesitation. At that moment, Bill's phone buzzed. The forensic handwriting team had compared the petition's signature to the earlier prescriptions. They matched perfectly. Brooke's eyes filled with tears of shock and regret as the magnitude of her misplacement of trust finally crystallized. Grace, oblivious to the cameras, leaned back in her chair, breathing a sigh of triumph, unaware that her empire had just begun to collapse. The next move was purely clinical in its cruelty. Bill's attorney, supported by incontrovertible evidence, filed an emergency injunction to bar Grace from practicing medicine, froze her assets, and subpoenaed all hospital records. Within hours, hospital administrators, pressured by district attorneys and faced with their own institutional liability, suspended Grace's credentials. News of the scandal rippled through the affluent circles of Los Angeles' elite, casting a pall over the Forrester family's glamorous events and Spencer's high-profile board meetings. Rumors swirled that hidden collaborators among the hospital's staff might face charges of conspiracy. Though Bill made it clear that his primary target was Grace, he needed to ensure she was held fully accountable for her crimes. In the eye of the storm, Brooke Logan felt the weight of her complicity. She had endorsed the fake surgery, vouched for its necessity, and rallied donors to cover the costs, actions that, in the eyes of prosecutors, constituted aiding and abetting medical fraud. Brooke, whose moral compass had always pointed toward saving lives, now found herself under an ethical and legal microscope. In hastily arranged peer reviews, physicians dissected the chain of decisions that had allowed Grace's scheme to succeed, and each time Brooke's name surfaced, the room fell silent. Even Stephanie and Ridge Forrester, torn between familial loyalty and the need to preserve the Maison's sterling reputation, found themselves questioning every handshake and champagne toast from the past months. Grace, once the golden girl of neurosurgery, watched her career unravel in real time from the secure room in the hospital's administrative wing. Her confrontations with Liam and Bill were explosive. She raged that her actions were in Liam's best interest, that the radical treatments had been necessary to stave off a greater neurological calamity. But as prosecutors presented the forged documents, the secret dosage logs, and the recorded admissions of intent, her defenses crumbled like a faulty craniotomy. The courtroom drama unfolded with a ferocity that rivaled any primetime thriller. Bill sat stiff-backed in the front row, his eyes cold and unwavering. Brooke, seated beside him, clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles went white. Liam appeared more vulnerable than he had ever been, the victim of a miracle that almost killed him. As the judge prepared to deliver a ruling, the Spencer and Logan families braced for impact. Would Grace face the maximum penalty for medical malpractice and fraud? Would Brooke's name be permanently tainted? And what would become of Liam, whose trust had been shattered by the very people who claimed to protect him? In that tense silence, every spectator felt the pulse of tragedy and redemption intertwine. Bill, who had launched the investigation to safeguard his son and revenge his wife's misplaced faith, realized that the true cost of justice might be steeper than he ever imagined. Yet as the gavel hovered above the bench, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. The truth, when unearthed, carries a force more powerful than any forged signature. Bill Spencer could still hear the tremor in the young nurse's voice as she recounted what she had heard in the sterile hush of the hospital hallway, the sharp, clipped tone of Grace Buckingham commanding an immediate increase in Liam's pain medication dosage, a momentary spike in volume that had cut through the usual calm of the night shift like a guillotine blade. The nurse, barely out of her internship, swore she'd paused at the doorway, heart pounding, as she heard Grace's voice echo, "Double the morphine immediately. He needs it stronger, now." Within minutes, Liam's monitors had flatlined. His body surrendered to the lethal cocktail she had ordered. Bill, already furious and suspicious from his earlier discovery of the forged prescriptions and phantom surgery, felt a new surge of resolve coursing through his veins. He would not rest until every piece of the puzzle lay exposed. Without a moment's hesitation, he commissioned a top-tier data recovery specialist with a reputation for resurrecting erased files from the deadest of hard drives. The expert arrived under the cover of dusk, his unmarked van disgorging cables, magnetic probes, and a half-dozen proprietary data analysis tools. For 3 tense days, they worked in secrecy at a nondescript tech lab Bill had rented, their screens flickering with binary code as they clawed through the remnants of the hospital's surveillance hard drive, only to discover that it had been wiped clean within 3 minutes of Liam's death. Every frame, every timestamp, every grain of visual evidence had been obliterated by someone who knew exactly which sectors to target and how to erase them without leaving the slightest trace. It was not a simple deletion, but a surgical strike on the data itself, executed with the precision of a neurosurgeon at the helm of a scalpel. Bill's blood ran cold when the tech specialist traced the erasure commands back to an internal network node, one that had been physically severed 15 feet down the corridor leading to the emergency wing. A forensic inspection of the network cable revealed a clean, angled cut, the sort of incision that could only be made by someone with not just a blade, but an intimate understanding of the network's architecture. It was a malicious act of sabotage, a clear sign that the puppeteer behind this tragedy had direct access to the hospital's IT infrastructure. Yet the web of potential suspects narrowed uncomfortably as Bill realized that among the hospital's inner circle, only one person possessed both the motive and the clandestine technical prowess to orchestrate such an operation, Grace Buckingham herself. Hints of her brilliance had always hovered at the edges of professional gossip, a rumored proficiency in coding and encryption that exceeded the usual credentials of a surgeon. Now it seemed she had weaponized those skills, embedding backdoor scripts in the hospital's security system, scripts designed to auto-delete critical video footage at any hint of forensic scrutiny. As Bill assimilated these revelations, his mind churned through the implications. Grace had manufactured not only the medical miracle, but the perfect cover-up. She had owed her elevated status among the hospital's elite to the breakthrough recovery she had engineered for Liam, and she had ensured that any attempt to peer behind the curtain would be met with silence, empty corridors, destroyed evidence, nurses too terrified to speak, or worse, unknowingly complicit in her scheme. His anger burned hot with the knowledge that Brooke Logan's faith in Grace's benevolence had unwittingly provided the surgical genius with the resources she needed. A carte blanche to manipulate schedules, reroute security feeds, and order shipments of sedatives under the guise of postoperative care. Brooke's philanthropic funding of Grace's projects had been the final green light, giving Grace free rein in the hospital's most restricted zones. And now, Brooke herself lay perilously close to a scandal that would shatter her reputation beyond repair. But Bill refused to be intimidated. He arranged an emergency strategy session in his penthouse boardroom, summoning Liam, Brooke, and the forensic tech. The room was shadowed, the city lights of Los Angeles twinkling like distant stars beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. With measured calm, Bill laid out the findings, the nurse's sworn statement, the wiped hard drive, the severed cable, the backdoor scripts embedded in the hospital's security protocols. He painted a portrait of Grace, not as the caring surgeon everyone believed her to be, but as a calculating mastermind, one who had used her gifts in medicine and technology to stage both a miracle and a murder. Brooke's face paled as the weight of her own decisions crashed into view, her endorsement of Grace, her push for the high-profile surgery, her naivete in assuming that professional brilliance could not mask a criminal mind. Liam sat slumped, grief and betrayal wrestling on his expression as he absorbed the final truth. The woman he had once regarded as a savior might have been the architect of his undoing. Determined to corner Grace in her own fortress of lies, Bill devised a trap worthy of her cunning. He commissioned a decoy forensic audit of the hospital's network logs, publicly announced under the guise of routine compliance. He knew Grace would intercept the heads-up. Her scripts would whisper warnings to her private servers, alerting her to any data probe. Then, under the cover of that announcement, he fed a false lead, a fabricated email suggesting that the data recovery team had uncovered a hidden vault of encrypted footage, one that, if decrypted, would reveal all the early stages of her unauthorized dosage interventions. Grace, convinced that exposure was imminent, would attempt a preemptive strike, triggering her self-wiping protocol one last time, leaving a trail of commands that could be traced back to her personal login credentials. The stage was set. On the chosen night, Bill sat in a rented surveillance van across the street from the hospital, his laptop aglow with remote terminal windows. Brooke and Liam huddled beside him, anxiety etched into their features as the clock ticked toward midnight. Inside the hospital, Grace logged into the admin console, her eyes darting across the network logs as she sought the phantom footage. Bill watched in real time as she hovered over the delete all command, her finger trembling slightly above the mouse. Then, as predicted, she clicked. A cascade of file destruction scripts executed in milliseconds, erasing terabytes of data. But not before Bill's own backdoor capture tool intercepted the commands, recording her username, her IP address, and the very timestamp of her betrayal. Bill allowed himself a grim smile as the screen displayed, command executed by Buckingham at 11:57 p.m., July 19, 2025. The following morning, news of Grace Buckingham's downfall hit the hospital like an avalanche. The district attorney's office convened a press conference to announce charges of medical fraud, tampering with evidence, and second-degree murder. Bill, flanked by Brooke and Liam, stepped to the podium to deliver a concise statement. What began as a quest for healing was hijacked by deception. We will no longer allow brilliance to cloak criminality. The cameras flashed as prosecutors presented the chain of digital evidence. Metadata logs, falsified prescription records, and the fatal order to increase Liam's morphine dosage. The severed network cable was displayed as a physical exhibit, its angled clean cut a testament to premeditation. Brooke, dignified yet visibly shaken, issued an apology to the families of other patients who might have suffered under Grace's hidden agenda. Liam, recovering from physical and emotional wounds, stood tall beside his parents, the victim of a miracle that had nearly been his last breath. Grace was escorted in handcuffs, her surgical whites replaced by a stark prison jumpsuit. As she passed by Bill's gaze, a flicker of defiance crossed her eyes before she lowered her head in resignation. In that moment, Bill felt a complex swirl of vindication and sorrow. The woman he'd once respected as a medical pioneer was revealed to be a murderer, her medical genius weaponized by her own hubris. The hospital's board swiftly suspended every project linked to Grace's research, forensic teams launched a full-scale audit to root out any further traces of her influence. Brooke, though exonerated of criminal charges thanks to Bill's insistence that she had acted in good faith, faced a rigorous review of her philanthropic decisions and a public reckoning with her judgment. Liam received counseling and support as he navigated the aftermath of manipulation that had nearly cost him his life. In the quiet aftermath, Bill reflected on the price of truth in a world where brilliance and betrayal often walked hand in hand. He resolved to establish a foundation in Liam's name, one dedicated to patient advocacy and the integrity of medical records, to ensure that no other family would endure the horrors they had faced. Brooke pledged to fund scholarships for medical IT security, a gesture born from her own humbling journey through complicity and redemption. As for Grace, she awaited trial in the sterile confines of a detention center, her reputation in ruins, her future uncertain. The scandal would reverberate through the halls of power in Los Angeles, a stark warning that even the most brilliant minds must be held accountable when their quest for glory crosses the line into darkness. And Bill, ever the strategist, knew that this victory was bittersweet. He had won justice for his son, but the cost had been the shattering of trust, the loss of innocence, and the grim reminder that evil often masquerades behind the white coat and the stethoscope.